Okay, terrific. All right, so for today's session, we are going to be doing an update and an overview of the strategic planning processes currently underway at UNAIDS, at the Global Fund, and the Stop TB Partnership, and updates around their new delegates from the NGO world. So with no further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce my longtime colleague and friend, Wangari Tharo, who is our fearless champion as one of the 2 North American board members to the NGO delegation at the Program Coordinating Board of UNAIDS. So Wangari has a slide deck to share with us, and maybe what we can do is we will hear from Wangari, and then we'll take a few minutes to ask any clarifying questions, and we'll leave the true question and answer and discussion period until the end of our session together today. Okay, any comments or questions before we begin? All right, welcome Wangari, and I hand it over to you.
Okay, so here is, thank you so much, Robin. And I am going to see if I can. Oh, I'm not sure what happened.
Because it just came up. Do you want to try? Oh, there we go.
If I try to put it into presentation mode, that's how it disappeared. So I'm
okay, that's not a problem. Maybe what you can do, are you able to zoom out your slide deck slightly?
What do you mean, do what?
To zoom it out so it's a little bit bigger. And beautiful.
As long as it doesn't end up at the image is covering the, yeah, so that's okay.
Yep, that's beautiful.
So so thank you so much, Robin, for that introduction. And so I work actually as the Director of Research and Programs at Women's Health in Women's Hands, which is a community health center that works with racialized women from Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and South Asian communities in Toronto. And we provide primary health care. And within that context, we have built our HIV program. As Robin said, I'm also the one of 2 North American reps on the NGO delegation of the UNAIDS PCB. Because I don't know how many people are aware of the NGO delegation on the PCB, so I'll say I have 2 slides just talking about the role. UNAIDS is the only UN body that allows for civil society engagement on its board, and the role of the delegation is to bring perspectives and expertise from those involved on the ground in the response to HIV. And here we're looking at people living with HIV, those at risk of HIV or vulnerable to HIV, those living at the margins of society or key populations, as well as civil society and other non-governmental organizations that are involved in the response. We ensure that any decisions made at the board are recognized or are based on human rights, are people-centered, equitable, and gender sensitive, and also ensure that access to comprehensive HIV prevention, treatment, support, and care is reinforced by policies at the country level, as well as the linked to the actions of the joint program and co-sponsors. So basically, we are there to advocate for better services, better involvement, and more comprehensive services for people who were at risk and those involved in the response. There are 10 members from 5 different regions, as broken down on this slide: North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Africa, Asia Pacific, as well as Europe, which covers both Western and Eastern Europe. The NGO delegation members are actually non-voting members. We don't vote, but we have a lot of power influencing decisions in favor of civil society and our multiple constituencies that are actually made by the board. And recently, I will actually talk about recently, in relation to the strategy development process, we really advocated for expansion of the timelines, because originally the consultation was supposed to happen between May and June, and we felt it was, that wasn't enough time to ensure that those are relevant to the response can be consulted in that limited amount of time in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people were focusing on two epidemics, and we felt it was important to ensure that the timeline will allow different stakeholders to contribute to the development of the strategy amid COVID-19. So we worked with the member states, and of course we know the member states that are very, very sympathetic to civil society issues, and will always support strategies that are coming from the NGO delegation. And once we spoke with them, we also spoke with civil society, and particularly the international networks that are actually involved in the response, and they all agreed that timeline wasn't going to work. So we advocated, and the timeline was actually extended, as we will see in the next couple of slides. So the process for strategy development actually involves several activities. There's going to be, there's a desk review, which is actually ongoing, looking at what has been achieved under the current strategy, what has worked and what has not worked, for which populations and for which regions. There's also going to be, there's also a survey and key informant interviews. And we did circulate the link to the survey, but it was actually closed on July 7th. So a lot of people actually filled the survey. And by the time we were holding the PCP meeting, June 23rd to the 25th, approximately 3,000 people had already filled the survey, but it was extended up to July 4th. And I'm sure, since we circulated it to Canadians, that you added to the numbers of people who were filling the survey. There are also going to be key informant interviews with selected people who, and this is by invitation. And then it's in September, there is going to be a virtual multi-stakeholder consultation meeting with options being developed for the PCB to be presented at the December meeting, as well as the strategy being developed and adopted sometime in March next year. I don't know if you can see this. It looks small, but maybe it's because I'm not wearing my glasses. I can't read the screen with my glasses on. So maybe it's my eyes. So this is how the process for the consultation is actually laid out. You can see here we had the survey, which was open from May to June. We have the desk review, which started in May to June, and a lot of the emerging data from the desk review is being presented in multiple places. But the key informant interviews and the focus groups will happen between June and July. So for those who are really interested in participating in these processes, you need to get on board pretty quickly. The stakeholder meeting will be held where all these collected data will be presented at the key stakeholder meeting, which will be held in September. October will be used to develop targets based on the and what emerges from the consultation. And eventually the plan is to have the entire strategy developed and adopted by the PCB in a special meeting in March 2021. So that's how the process is actually outlined. And we know there is commitment to ensure that any region that want to facilitate focus groups, I know we've been told at the NGO delegation that this is possible and we can help facilitate that process. So that's how the strategy looks like. So the question is, why do you need to contribute to the strategy process? I think we all know that the best information comes from the ground. In particular, because anything that is reported by countries to UNAIDS, based on the desk research they're actually doing, reported by countries, you can be sure there is missing information because they may not talk to everybody who is responding on the ground. So we need to understand what is actually happening on the ground, particularly because of COVID. COVID has impacted the HIV response in a lot of ways. It may not have happened so much in Canada, but in developing countries, this is a big issue. There is failure of suppliers to deliver ARV medication on time. Shutdown of land and air transportation has caused a lot of issues. And also the lockdown has impacted access to services, because if you're in lockdown, people going for their regular blood tests, going for their regular appointments, that was disrupted. And in fact, a survey that was released 2 days ago by WHO on COVID-19 and its impact actually shows that 33% of people in 24 countries have experienced shortages of the HIV medication. And I know this issue was actually raised in Canada at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Canada, people may have been able to get a 1 month supply, but some countries such as Bolivia, one of the NGO delegations shared at the recent PCB meeting that sometimes you would only get a 1 week supply of medication because of the lockdown and delays in issues with transportation and issues with ARVs arriving on time. We also know that issues of stigma and discrimination are there, violence against women, girls, and as well as key populations have also increased during COVID-19. And we need these to be taken into consideration in the next strategy, with people on the ground talking what are some of the impacts that we actually need to think about. What are the impacts of COVID-19 on the HIV response in relation to determinants of health, in relation to access to food, and in relation to even access to services during the lockdown. So, and how that may have impacted the response. The other piece is around that if you look at if you saw the launch of the 2020 Global AIDS Report, we are not on target, that we are actually not going to meet some of the targets set for 2020. And you can see on this slide here that in a period of more than 19 years, we have only reduced HIV transmission by 39% and only by 23% since 2010. HIV-related deaths have only fallen by 51% in a period of 19 years. And 15 million people have been on therapy. But currently we know that 24.4 million people who are on treatment, but 12.6 million people can't access treatment. So this is not we won't be meeting the target of ending AIDS by 2030 unless we can actually increase the number of people who are on ARVs to reduce AIDS-related AIDS-related death. We also have some key targets that are really concerning. That the number of new infections, instead of going down, have plateaued at 1.7 million. Those are new infections. There is also a modest reduction in HIV-related deaths. And you can see from there, and if you remember in the targets, AIDS-related deaths were supposed to be less than 500. So we have missed that target. In some countries, HIV infection has actually increased by 72% in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, 22% in the Middle East and North Africa, and 21% in Latin America. I also know that we can't say we have done very well in Canada, in that we also know that a very high number of men who have sex with men and gay men continue to bear the burden of HIV, and we haven't reduced the infection rate among men who have sex with men that much. Some populations, such as ACP populations and indigenous populations, we can't even talk about how much we have actually reduced the rate of HIV transmission. So we need to try and figure out that we're going to miss a lot of targets, and this has been complicated more by COVID-19, in that resources get diverted in to deal with the COVID-19. What happens to the HIV response? We need to be able to articulate that for the next strategy. So what are the bottlenecks, and how can Canadian organizations contribute? I think a lot of people think that UNAIDS only worries about HIV in developing countries or middle-income countries. But a lot of countries, including Canada, report on their progress to UNAIDS. So we need to ensure that we are capturing for Canada, we are capturing what is actually happening on the ground to influence what gets reported. But also, as part of the strategy, what do we want to go, what issues do we want to go in, particularly for the priority populations in Canada? So we need to figure out what is working, not working, how can it be improved, what are the bottlenecks, what is slowing progress, and in particular, how can we ensure the language of human rights, harm reduction, sexual and reproductive health, that we actually have in the current strategy, that we actually don't lose it when we open it and decide we're going to go for a new strategy. We know that the right, led by the United States, is trying to claw back on all these wins we have done, had over the years. How can we protect these gains in a new strategy? What strategies are we going to come up to protect them? And what do we do as Canadians to ensure we don't lose anything? We also need to support inclusion of key populations in the consultations, as well as in any proposed actions that are actually taken. We know a lot of key populations, such as sex workers, drug users, and men who have sex with men, as well as and including migrants and displaced populations, as well as women and girls. We need to figure out how do we optimize HIV treatment, HIV prevention, treatment, support, and care to ensure that we are reducing deaths, to ensure that we are reducing transmission, and to ensure that we are covering all the angles that actually need to be covered. And in particular, when you know that there are a lot of legal barriers related to access for specific key populations. So we need to figure out how are we going to move those issues within the in the next strategy while protecting the rights of those populations. So, and I think that's my last slide, Robin. Hopefully other issues will come up during the discussion.
Wangari, thank you so much. That was a terrific presentation and a really comprehensive overview of the strategy process, how we can get engaged, but also why does this matter, and what are some of the key messages that hopefully our organizations can carry forward in our contributions to those discussions. So thank you very, very, very much. I'm going to open it up now to folks for clarifying questions. All right, and for those who are joining us, we are going to hold our question and answers and discussion period until we've heard from all three speakers. But if you do have a clarifying question, please either raise your hand using the raise hand function, which should be down at the bottom of your right-hand screen in the participants list, or please put it into the chat that you would like to speak, and I will call on you to unmute. So any clarifying questions for Wangari at the moment? It was a very comprehensive and clear presentation. Wangari, might we be able to share these slides with everyone following our discussion today? Would that be possible?
No, that's fine. That's okay.
Terrific. All right, so if there are no clarifying questions at the moment for Wangari, I'm going to say thank you, Wangari, and look forward to our engaging discussion.
So how do I return back to you?
So you should have a little button that says stop share screen.
I don't see it.
It
I see the whole
might
screen
be at the very top. If you put your cursor up at the top.
Oh, it's coming up and then it disappears. And I have something else that says zoom in, whatever it's covering it.
Oh, I actually, there we go.
Oh, perfect. Is that okay?
That is perfect. That's perfect. Super. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to pull up my screen and we will start to discuss a little bit about the Global Fund strategic planning process or strategy development process and ways in which we can contribute. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. And is it big enough? Should I look at trying to make it bigger?
It looks good, Robin.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. All right, so the Global Fund strategy development process and how we can contribute. So I thought it might be helpful to just start off with really why does this matter? So in fact, it continues nicely from Wangari's last slide. A number of these global health strategy development processes, of course, seem to be very distant and far away from local realities. But in fact, as we know, global policy development around some of these target settings and general strategic directions and priorities really have amazing significance at local level, because it is at local level that we actually implement and feed into those global report backs. So although it's set at global levels, the implementation is actually here at home and at all local levels and in our communities. As Wangari so eloquently put, the knock-on impact and the direct impact of COVID really has an astounding impact on HIV, TB, and malaria. And for those of us who have been part of AIDS 2020, either within the Global Village or the exhibition, the Canada Pavilion, or as delegates to AIDS 2020, we see that there is, we knew that we would be off our trajectory. We were already off course, and COVID has bumped us even further off course from our global goals of 2030. But we have heard reports, stunning reports by UNAIDS, where we are likely to be put back by 10 to 20 years, depending on whether we're talking about HIV, TB, or malaria. What's really concerning is that for countries like Canada in the what's so-called global north, although there are discussions about a second wave, our perspective about COVID has changed dramatically since the first lockdowns in middle of March. And we're seeing a lot of things open up at the moment. We've had a social safety net where our governments have been able to infuse our societies with funding to be able to support economies, to support workers who have been laid off because of closures and lockdown restrictions. But we've also seen a number of supplies, right? We've had significant access to essential health commodities, including PPE and so forth, to help ensure that our health workers are protected and our frontline workers. So this is very different from the realities that we know at country level in countries that we know as or called the Global South. And so what we are seeing is COVID is starting to really break loose in the countries of the Global South. And that's hugely concerning, given that although countries are getting increased access to diagnostics and to preventative technologies, if we see that our health workers, both in terms of within the formal healthcare setting as well as in community settings, whether they're community health workers or outreach workers or peer educators or community staff at community-based organizations, once they start to fall sick, if they do not have the proper protective equipment, then essentially we are going to see a significant collapse of all of our services that are going to have far-reaching impact beyond HIV, TB, and malaria. And it's going to have detrimental impact on how health systems are able to respond to a wide range of health needs of populations in the Global South. We're seeing increased prices and shortages of ARVs, but also for TB and for malaria testing. We are seeing that there continues to be a diversion of resources away from HIV, TB, and malaria programming, particularly in the early days of COVID-19, when we were seeing things like Gene Expert, which is used for TB, being used for the diagnostics of COVID-19, and often these very important machines being taken from more community health centers to the center, the epicenters of each country, and then really inhibiting the access for testing for TB. We've seen a significant decrease of 40 to 50% in new cases being diagnosed for TB. But diversion of resources doesn't necessarily just mean technological resources. It also means health personnel. It also means financial resources. We've seen an increase in human rights abuses. We've seen new access barriers, whether it is because of lockdowns and people are not able to access health centers or able to get to pharmacies to get their therapies. And we've also seen an increased level of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, things that Wangari has already so articulately referred to. Why does this matter? It also matters because when we're talking about the Global Fund, which is the largest global health institution, financing institution for HIV, TB, and malaria programming worldwide, this is an opportunity where we are able to have a very politically charged discussion about how those resources at the Global Fund are allocated across the 3 diseases. At the moment, despite the fact that TB is the leading global infectious disease killer worldwide, Global Fund resources are actually only 18% that go to TB, despite the fact that it is one of the largest, if not the largest funder for TB interventions worldwide. 50% of Global Fund funding goes to HIV programming, and 32% goes to malaria. And again, the Global Fund is the largest funder for malaria interventions. So this is a really important moment for civil society and for Canadian civil society to have a say in how we should be more equitably distributing those resources in order to have a greater public health outcome and impact. We also need to place greater priority and secure a place for community rights and gender. And so this again is echoing back to what Wangari was raising in terms of human rights language, but also ensuring that human rights, community system strengthening, so ensuring that community-led interventions are well-resourced, and that human rights becomes a focal point that is cross-cutting and needs to be integrated into all HIV, TB, and malaria programming, and that gender considerations are included. Space for civil society. Well, what we have been seeing over many, many years, but now in particular with COVID, is we're seeing a shrinking space for civil society. We're seeing, hopefully this will not happen, although we're hearing some early warning signs of shrinking space within the governance bodies of these important global health institutions, such as at UNAIDS and others. But civil society has a huge role to play, both within these governance boards, in order to be able to raise those uncomfortable issues, in order to ensure that the voices of communities around the world are heard, and that key populations voices are heard at these important donor tables and policy tables. But even within COVID, we've seen that the space of civil society under COVID-19 has continued to shrink in many countries of the global south, whether it's increased criminalization of key populations as being scapegoats for COVID-19, whether it's a diversion of resources away from community interventions or community-led interventions towards more health systems in the traditional sense of laboratory capacity building and so on. But also in terms of ensuring that there is a strong engagement of community and civil society voices at country level who submit the resources, the funding requests to institutions like the Global Fund to ensure that community needs are being met and that the money that is allocated to countries is actually meeting and getting to communities at greatest risk. And then finally, why does this matter? Well, one of the key things is that we have a high-level meeting on HIV happening next year. And this is where we are going to reflect on progress made against the commitments that member states all signed on to in 2016. And they are going to sign on to a new political declaration with new targets. And given the sensitivities that Wangari has raised around issues of sexual reproductive health and rights, around the engagement and empowerment of community and civil society and key populations, around intellectual property rights, a number of these are hot button topics that really threaten to see rollbacks in the next political declaration if we do not ensure that these principles, this language, these interventions, these needs are front and center in all of these global health institutions and their strategic planning processes. So with that, I'm going to just go quickly through the background of the Global Fund's strategy development process. And I do see, I think we have a question. Okay, thanks, Robin. This is the background, a little bit of a backgrounder to the Global Fund strategy process, outlining the timeline. I hope everybody can see that. From the period when the Global Fund was established as an emergency response, and over the years, how it has transitioned into an institution that delivers differentiated programming based on country context and country needs, and is an investor, a catalytic investor, as it likes to call itself, to spur innovations at country and community level. So right now we are finding ourselves here at 2018. We are entering into the second part of the current Global Fund strategy. And I think it's important to recognize that the Global Fund strategy development process will be establishing a new strategy that will come into implementation in 2023. But the things that are happening now within the global health architecture and the things that Wangari was talking about with UNAIDS will have huge implications in terms of how the Global Fund and its mission is positioned within the COVID context, within global public health security agendas and discussions, and how it is positioned for the strategy period in 2023. So these, at the moment, seem to be very disconnected strategic discussions within the Global Fund at the moment. And it's something that the 3 civil society delegations to the Global Fund board continue to talk about in our weekly meetings with the board and the executive director, Peter Sands. And it is something that we continue to raise during all of the formal board committee meetings and board meetings, that these 2 processes need to be linked. Because how the Global Fund responds to COVID in terms of protecting its investments in HIV, TB, and malaria, but also as an important actor within the global health architecture for the global response to COVID, understanding that if we don't have a spot in this, that there will be knock-on impacts on HIV, TB, and malaria, recognizing COVID as a new co-infection, a new opportunistic infection of HIV and TB in many cases. But how it positions itself within that architecture also positions itself for how the Global Fund and how the global environment will be relying on the Global Fund to respond to other emerging pandemics and infectious diseases outside of HIV, TB, and malaria. So in fact, it could be looking at indirectly an expansion of mandate. So important to consider when we're looking at, again, a fall of resources worldwide for HIV, TB, and malaria, and knowing that the Global Fund remains at this point the lead investor in HIV, TB, and malaria, and has an important role in safeguarding those resources. All right, so here's the Global Fund strategy development timeline. So we are currently here in Q2 of 2020, and we'll talk about an open consultation process that has been launched. It was launched just at the end of May, the beginning of June, I believe. And we'll see what is involved in that in the next couple of slides. There are a number of things that will be coming out that will be of particular interest to all of us in terms of looking at and evaluating how the Global Fund has done in achieving its current strategy. And that will be with the Strategic Report 2020, which will be coming out at the end of Q3, so around September, October. And then the holding of partnership forums, which we will also talk about. It is here in Q2 of 2021, so that is the May board meeting of 2021, a year from now essentially, that the strategic framework for the next strategy period will be approved by the board. And then in the November board meeting of 2021 is when the full narrative of the strategy will be discussed and approved, and a draft monitoring and evaluation framework and a performance measurement framework, which we call a key performance framework, a key performance indicator framework, will be also discussed and then approved at the May board meeting in 2022. All of this then leads right into, threads across, and leads into the development of the next investment case for the 7th replenishment. And of course here, a lot of the dominant discourse that we're having with the executive director at the moment is the importance of the Global Fund in really playing a role in the global COVID response, understanding that COVID is going to be with us for many, many years and is going to have a tail that strings throughout largely the next strategy period of 2023 and beyond. And so how we position ourselves now is also early positioning for ourselves for the next Global Fund replenishment, the 7th replenishment, which will happen in the 4th quarter of 2022. In between that, the investment case and the 7th replenishment, of course, we will come to discussions, important discussions about the allocation methodology and how those funds from the 7th replenishment will be allocated across countries. And of course, again, we'll continue the conversation that's initiated in the strategy development process around the allocation and the disease split and how those resources are allocated across HIV, TB, and malaria programming writ large. As we were mentioning, it is an important time. So this is a slide that just quickly looks at all of the different partner strategy development processes that are underway. And how the Global Fund is aligning itself, not necessarily to be in compliance with, but to ensure that the processes are speaking to one another and that the general trends and outcomes from their different consultations are being taken into consideration with one another. So here we have more information about the open consultation process. It was launched at the end of May and it's going to be running throughout 2020. We're looking at an initial round of input to be received by the 1st of September so that it can feed into the October committee meetings, which are the standing committee meetings of the board. And then those discussions and those decisions or recommendations for decision get taken and discussed at the full board, which will happen in November of this year. There are 5 areas of questions in terms of strengthening program implementation. How do we support stakeholders and partnerships? How can we better deliver results in terms of our programming, but also in terms of stimulating and catalyzing innovation? And what might be some best ideas for change? And of course, all of this needs to take into consideration our current and rapidly evolving context of COVID. The consultation questions may be evolved thematically as the conversation develops, both at board level, but also in terms of the input that's received. There are a number of decks, and we will talk about that in just a second in the next slide, that will be used and that are used, and a number of resources that individuals and constituencies can access through the Global Fund microsite that help to provide background and important context for these strategy development discussions. And then here, the input can be submitted through a secure online form or via email. And so all of those details are provided here, and everyone can have a copy to this slide deck. I think it's important to say also this slide deck is very, very recent and has been taken from an update to the Strategy Committee, which is one of the 3 standing board committees of the Global Fund that took place last week and was held virtually. So this is the most updated information around the strategy development process. So here's a little bit about the strategy development website and some of the, again, it's another way of looking at the timeline. A little bit about how the consultation is being kicked off. All of the delegations and the constituencies represented at the Global Fund, whether it's at the board table or different regional platforms that are funded through Global Fund programming, are all now developing plans for local consultations to ensure that we have the farthest reach and we are able to access as many voices as possible into this process. And again, the initial input will be rolled up so that we are able to have important board discussions, both in a retreat in September and then again at the board meeting in November. Here is an overview of the different sources of evidence that are up on the Global Fund microsite. And here you can see the full list is available at the website below. And the landscape analysis that's provided in the slide deck, as well as partner resources, including global plans, but also some very important Global Fund resources and reports that have helped to identify already some existing gaps and bottlenecks that we're seeing at country level as we're rolling out the different programs. All right, this is my last slide, and this is around partnership forums. So for those of us who have been involved in partnership forums for the previous Global Fund strategy development processes, we know that there are usually 3 or 4 of them, and they're held regionally, and there is an application process that people can apply to. And then also a methodology that will be approved by the strategy committee in terms of how the Secretariat will select amongst the applications that do come in. Those partnership fora in the past have been in person, and they've been held over a series of days, usually 2, with a civil society pre-meeting usually leading into those 2-day forums. They are facilitated forums and they are very hands-on and help to really give direction and guidance to the board of the Global Fund in terms of where the key priorities and key themes really come out for consideration for the final strategic framework. The initial board approved dates for those in-person meetings for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, September 8th to the 9th. That would largely involve not only the region of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, but also of Latin America and the Caribbean. Johannesburg for October 13th to the 15th for Western Central Africa and South and Eastern Africa. And then for Southeast Asia and that region, it would be held November 3rd to the 5th in Bangkok. Now we know from global trends that COVID is likely to peak in certain areas around these times. So it has just been discussed at the board meeting in May and again last week at the strategy committee that indeed we are looking at holding these forums virtually, which makes it even more important that we are considerate and sensitive and are really planning for how we are able to engage the hardest to reach and being able to have access to digital technologies and to airtime and to internet packages that will allow them to participate. So at the moment, the partnership forum are being postponed until Q1 of the next year, so that we can see where things are with COVID and with lockdowns. But it is also allowing us time to be able to put really comprehensive plans in place to enable lots of different consultations happening virtually at local, at country level, at regional level, and at global level. So it does say down here at the very bottom that the strategy committee, which is the SC, will be requested to approve the new dates and format for partnership forums in September 2020. So more to come on that, but I think it's important that we already start thinking about, and within our respective organizations and projects that we have, both here in Canada, but also overseas with partners, how we can help to elevate voices of the Global South, of key populations, of communities greatest affected by the 3 diseases in their participation in the strategy process. So I will leave it at that and look forward to hearing any clarifying questions and sharing this, this slide deck with you afterwards, and then we'll open it up for discussion after we hear from Katie Kidwright. Any clarifying questions at this point? It's a lot of information, and again, we will have a number of different webinars where we can drill into these issues more deeply. But would love to hear any questions that you might have from the content that's just been presented. Okay. Well, very well then, and looking forward to the discussion. So I'm going to hand it over right now to Katie Kidwright, who's going to wear 2 hats. First, as a delegate to the NGO delegation to the Stop TB board, but also as our fearless leader of GFAN, the Global Fund Advocates Network, who also is working alongside and going to be leading up a number of conversations around the Global Fund strategy development process. So Katie, over to you.
Thanks, Robin. Appreciate it. And thanks for that incredible overview of the process. It's been a long set of discussions over the last few months as everything has pivoted in the context of COVID. So thanks for sharing that. And I am not in my normal place of work, having the good fortune to be able to go to New Brunswick to visit family after self-isolating with my family for 2 weeks, which we're currently doing at a cottage. So my video is likely to cut out, and so I will probably turn it off quickly and just proceed with my voice. So I apologize for that because I know it's not anywhere near as interesting. I hope you can all hear me though. Can you hear me, Robin?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, good. Great. Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to make sure before I kept babbling. So maybe what I can do is just sort of add on to some of what Robin was saying in terms of the Global Fund strategy. And I apologize, I don't have a PowerPoint for all of you. But for those of you who don't know Global Fund Advocates Network, we are an open membership of advocates from all around the world who are interested in working towards a more effective and fully funded Global Fund. We've been around for almost 10 years now, which is a little unbelievable. But as a network, we often work on key issues like strategy development processes together to ensure sort of a cohesive sort of civil society response to whatever the issues of the day are. Go ask your dad. Sorry, 3-year-olds. In terms of the Global Fund strategy, in the past, what GFAN has done is essentially try to act as sort of a space for civil society and communities who are not necessarily engaged at the level that, say, Robin is being a member of the board, or others who've been around for a really long time are, and to try and find ways to, you know, disseminate the information broadly, but also make it accessible and provide opportunities for participation. So in the past, we've done things like ensure that when partnership forums took place, that we had essentially a rapporteur in place to be able to listen to the input that civil society and communities were giving during the partnership forums, to be able to bring that back to, you know, others who maybe didn't attend a partnership forum, or you know, are really just doing this from one corner of their desk of a larger piece of work, and we're able to then maybe turn that into online contributions to the strategy development process. So that's the kind of thing we've done in the past in terms of a very practical piece of work, and that's exactly what we're planning to do now, even in this virtual context. And in some ways, the virtual meetings will allow us to have our rapporteur at more consultations and more meetings where these things will be being discussed. So we do hope, you know, trying to look on the positive side of things, we do hope that, you know, a lot of these consultations and discussions that will happen ahead of the partnership forums and, you know, throughout the strategy process because many of them will be virtual this time around, we do hope that we'll be able to hear and collate a lot more information from the ground in terms of the lived realities of people with the 3 diseases and the work and policy change that they need to see to meet the challenges of not just COVID, but the evolving dynamics of the 3 diseases. So that's sort of very specifically in terms of the Global Fund strategy. We haven't met in a little while. I'll be, very honest with all of you. Some of you who I know, some of who I don't, but it's been a challenging few months with the emergence of COVID in terms of our workload. And, the strategy was something that we came out of our sort of GFAN meeting at the beginning of March, very gung-ho to get moving on. And we've had to put that on a back burner a little bit for the last couple of months, but we'll be getting back to that in probably early August so that we're ready to roll in September as the virtual consultations continue and as the dates around the partnership forums themselves become more clear. So if you've never checked us out online, go ahead, globalfundadvocatenetwork.org, and we'll be sharing information there. There's a listserv you can sign up to, but also it's where you'll find a home for some of this work. And we look forward to continuing to work with the civil society delegations to the Global Fund Board, as well as the regional community rights and gender platforms to the Global Fund. So then to just say a little bit about some of the ACTA stuff, I don't know how many people are familiar with that ridiculous acronym, but it's the Access to COVID Technologies Accelerator, which is the large WHO sort of framework for responding to COVID-19. And our work, can you still hear me, Robin? Yeah, okay, good. Our work as GFAN has been to try and make space for civil society and community voices within that platform and that framework writ large. So have civil society and community representatives in place in all of those pillars and working groups and various discussions, which is way easier said than done. But I would say in the last 2 months with people like Robin and some of the other civil society delegation representatives to the Global Fund Board, to UNITAID, to UNAIDS as well, there has been great progress. And with the exception of the vaccine pillar, which is still a little bit of there's still a little bit of work to do there. But we have been successful in essentially pushing civil society representatives into basically every conversation, every working group, every part of the structure other than the broad facilitation council, but we are working on that. And so a lot of our work has been around supporting getting those civil society representatives in place and determining processes for selecting sort of permanent representatives where we were only able to get people in interim ways. And the second part of our work has been, we've only done it once so far, but we hope to do it more regularly alongside my colleague from Aki Health, who's based in Kenya, but also is the advocacy and communications lead now for CSEM, the UHC 2030 Civil Society Engagement Mechanism. And we hope to have more regular calls for essentially everyone who is interested in COVID-19 advocacy, for lack of, sort of better words. So for everyone to get updates around the issues are coming down the pipeline, where some of the opportunities for consultation and input, so that we can, have the perspectives and voices of people who are experiencing living with COVID and the impacts of COVID in the long term as well as the short term, can be engaged in those discussions. And so those sort of 2 elements of sort of hoping to provide a platform for broader civil society, as well as supporting the civil society reps within the ACTA framework has been, oh, thanks for putting that up, Robin. And that's what the framework looks like with its connector that we call it now running across the bottom, in case you've not seen this before. So hopefully, we will be able to share a lot more information and a lot more opportunities for collaboration and input as we go forward, now that we're getting past this sort of critical initial phase of essentially pushing for and getting representation throughout those pillars and that health system connector across the bottom. So that's sort of the Global Fund sort of side of things, but also since last September, I was selected to sit on the Stop TB Partnership Developed Country NGO delegation. And it's the first time that the board members for the developed country NGO, developing country NGO, and communities have had actual delegations. And so when I have participated with Robin and others in Global Fund boards, it's like this really complex, like there's 10 or 12 people per delegation who meet for days ahead of board meetings and have bi-weekly calls and meet constantly and email constantly about, you know, all kinds of decisions that are being made around procurement and supply and grants and, you know, all these kinds of things. This is a very well-established process. Stop TB board is and the delegations are very new, and I don't think our feet yet, but that we are trying, and that there are a number of sort of you know, key things that will be coming up, not just how the response to COVID is going, but tied to the Global Fund strategy, as Robin was sharing earlier, around TB split in terms of the disease split of the Global Fund, and discussing that within the strategy, as well as a number of sort of other key issues, which includes that by and large, because of the disease split, a lot of TB focused programming often comes out of grant savings. And of course, a lot of grant savings right now have been sort of shifted to COVID responses, which means that some of the usual resources that people might have seen or might have expected going towards TB programming at this stage in the last year of Global Fund grant cycle will not be there. So it will be a little bit of a double impact in a way. So so a lot of those issues are the kinds of things that as Stop TB delegation reps will be, you know, looking at. There is an operational strategy that runs out at the end of this year. So I assume, again, I don't know, I haven't heard yet, but I assume that there will be you know, discussion around that. And then of course, as we get to the end of the plan that goes through 2022, there will be discussions of a more sort of policy and implementation level around that. I'm not sure. I did just want to share, just in case people didn't know, because I think that the Global Fund Board does this as well. But what was really interesting to me is that you can go on the Stop TB website and you can actually find all of the information and documents that are shared at Stop TB board meetings. And I'm just posting the latest one from the board meeting in December of last year, just in case it's of interest to go back and look. A lot of the, you know, it's funny when you look back at what we were talking about in just December of last year is so changed now with COVID. But we talked a lot about some of the gains, frankly, that have been made in the last few years, which included a number of really key, you know, guidelines that were you know, discussed and consulted around that didn't exist 10 years ago. There were no guidances around human rights and TB. There were no gender and TB guidances. There were no key populations and TB guidances. And, you know, in 2019, there are now, I forget, like 8 or 9 or 10, you know, there's a whole bunch more that are, you know, gender assessment tool, stigma assessment tool, key population briefs, these kinds of things. And those are some really big changes in terms of the way that the TB community works together, and the way that the Stop TB Partnership and its board, you know, is trying to situate the conversations around TB going forward. So I'm going to stop there because I don't feel like I have the same depth of information that I can share from Robin, but I hope that's useful, and, you know, always open to hearing from anyone about the work that we do on the delegation as well as GFAN. So thanks, Robin, for the opportunity today.
Thanks so much, Katie. Really helpful. And I think lots of interesting news also around Stop TB board. And perhaps we can look at holding some pre-Stop TB board consultations with folks, with civil society, similar to what we have done in the past around the Global Fund and UNAIDS. Perhaps we can pick that back up again, because I think, as you so rightly state, as we all have, I mean, these are really important discussions and require some civil society and community voices certainly taking the lead there. So happy to help organize that if that's something that is of interest to the group.
I'm sure it would be. We'd need an agenda before the day before the meeting, but yes, we'll get there.
So that's a little inside joke about the ACTA, because we often get the agenda and the call-in details as civil society about 15 minutes before the meeting is actually happening, which of course makes it difficult to consult a broader group of experts and on the issues that are coming to the table. But in any case, we'll get there. All right, folks, so we have 20 minutes before we will close today's session. And again, this is not the only time that we will have to talk about this, but would really love to hear from you. Some of the thoughts and the reflections that you have had either in lead up to today's webinar, as we've been discussing and sharing this, this information from UNAIDS, from Global Fund, from Stop TB, from GFAN. Would love to hear from you now. I know Robin from Results Canada has a couple of questions. But again, if you do have anything that you would like to ask or share with us, either raise your hand using the raise hand function on your right-hand side, or you can just indicate in the chat box that you would like to say something, and then I can call on you. So over to you. Robin, do you want to kick us off with some of your questions?
Sure, happy to. Hello, everyone. My name's Robin. Also Robin, two Robins here. I work at Results Canada. I'm just curious, so this will be my first experience engaging with a global fund strategy process. And so I'm wondering if this briefing was super helpful to understand the process and what it might look like, but I'm wondering if we might come together as a group and kind of coordinate some of our key policy asks before making submissions, or do we tend to just go off and do that on our own?
Fantastic question, and it was almost as if it was planned, but it really wasn't. So on this piece of paper, I've made note to myself to just indicate that there are a number of ways in which we can go about feeding into these different strategic planning processes. So we can do it as individuals and organizations. That's one way, right? And I think the more the better. We can come together as a collective of Canadian organizations and individuals with a collective statement about key policy asks and priorities. We can do it through GFAN, through Katie, and the different processes that GFAN colleagues are going to offer. You can also do it through Wangari and myself, and through Katie as individual members, both to the Stop TB board, me as the board member for the Developed Country NGO delegation. So this is our constituency. So the Developed Country NGO delegation works with civil society organizations from non-eligible Global Fund countries, so often referred to as the Global North. So there are lots of ways in which we can engage, and I think the more the better. So would be really interested in taking that idea forward, Robin, about a collective statement of policy asks, if that's something that is of interest to the group.
It would certainly be of interest to me, so I'd be willing to participate and engage in something like that. And if we all decide that it makes good sense to submit individual submissions, organization-specific submissions, and then I could even feed that up into the Action Global Health Advocacy Partnership, because we're all part of different things. But for me, because I'm kind of new, like having some of that guidance from those who understand what the needs are from on the ground would be helpful for me to feel confident that I'm submitting something that's appropriate.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So
may I say something, Robin?
Yes, absolutely, Wangari.
This is Wangari, and I am going to add on to what Robin said, in that for the strategy consultation for the global UNAIDS strategy, we have actually been told as the NGO delegation that if the people who want to do focus groups, they will allow for focus groups to be facilitated by either the NGO delegation or anybody who is interested to ensure we capture issues that are relevant to different stakeholders. So if I can actually share that at our meeting next week of the NGO delegation, that we would like to do a Canadian focus group, and how that process is actually going to be to unfold. Then I'll get back to people, because that's it's open. You want to do a focus group, the UNAIDS is going to help facilitate that process.
Terrific. That's wonderful. So I think that is something that is definitely of interest, and I think everyone on the call can help share any information about that through our respective networks, so that we can get as many people as possible involved in that opportunity. Thanks, Wangari. Other questions, thoughts, reflections, comments, concerns? Burnaby, over to you. Welcome, my friend. So Burnaby, you are on mute.
Yeah.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now.
Many thanks for organizing this meeting. I am Bernabe Yamego, and I am working from Plan Canada. And we do have a few grants in the field supporting countries to access to Global Fund project, and also working as headquarter support to the different grants. So we do receive already the survey from Global Fund to fill.
Great.
And this is something that we are doing with our country office to have a good overview of the grant. But I think that what Robin also is saying will be interesting to see, being a civil society organization here in Canada, how we can come together also to fill some survey and have some strategic discussion to support the development of the strategy will be welcome. And we are willing to participate to the process in Canada here too. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Burnaby. And that's terrific. And hearing and your ability to bring the voices from the programs and with the people that you work with on the ground will be really incredibly valuable. So thank you very much. Other thoughts, questions? It's a lot of information. What we'll do is we'll keep including you, if you're all okay with that, in a little bit of as a listserv, so that you'll be included you'll receive any updates or any next webinars that we might have, or online discussions around these different issues. So encourage you to participate, just to come and listen, to share your reflections, to share things that you're hearing from your own projects on the ground. Yes, and share it with your networks. Terrific. I see Sion. Hi, Sion. Nice to hear you. She says, hi, Robin. Did you say you will share the recording and the slides? And yes to both of that. Likely tomorrow, you will receive the slides and the recordings from either myself or from Shayna Bueller, who was the contact point for this webinar today. Terrific. All right, Wangari, can I ask you another question? And perhaps you referred to it in your slides. If so, I apologize for asking it again, but recognizing that we are coming up to a really important moment in the whole trajectory towards 2030, and that's our 2020 targets of 90, 90, 90, and that whole treatment cascade, or 95, 95, 95. Has there been discussion at the most recent PCB in June around that target setting and revisions, knowing that we are so far off course at the moment? And how can civil society get involved in that target setting process, which will be different from the strategy process at UNAIDS?
I think the target setting is supposed to be done after the review has been finalized. It's supposed to be in October, and it's supposed to be based on what emerges from all these consultations, plus the review of where we are with the current targets and which do we need to move forward, because, you know, as you saw from what I said earlier, we have fallen short in a number of areas and are not likely to meet any of those targets. And COVID-19 is going to make that even more complicated.
Mhm.
So part of where civil society can actually play a part is ensuring you get involved in the consultations themselves, because that's where you provide the input that is going to determine what the targets are actually going to be. So if you know, the focus groups, the key informant interviews are really, really important, and the survey based on what people said in the survey as well. So when all that is collected, it is what is going to provide the information for target setting. So it's, and I'm not sure how people get involved in the target setting itself. I'd have to find out that, but I'm not sure whether it's open to civil society or the group that is going to do the target setting also involves civil society members, and which members are those. So I will find out that information.
Terrific. Thanks, Wangari. Yep, that's great. Super helpful. So we'll keep our eyes out for more information about that.
Yeah, it's actually really important for people to keep their eyes open, because the next declaration, like you said, in either July or June 2021,
Mm-hmm.
is going to be informed by this strategy being developed now. So whatever targets are set within the strategy will end up being the targets that actually end up in the declaration, because it's, you know, that's the way the process works.
That's right.
So that if you want to help inform that high level meeting, you have to actually get involved from the upfront processes that are actually happening now. So I can't overemphasize how important it is for people to get involved in the consultation.
Super, super. We have a question from Petra.
Hi everyone. So my name is Petra. I work for the TB PPM Learning Network, which is a new network that we launched in October last year, and it's looking at involving the private sector into the TB activities and ending TB. And we have a large network. Actually, through COVID, we've set up a lot of discussions with private practitioners, hospitals, and there are about 1,100 members that are involved from around the world. And it's a really good group with a lot of activity, and obviously many are involved with Global Fund related activities. And one of the things that we've been working on with civil society, and these are about 9 different civil society groups from around the world who are involved in tuberculosis. We've looked at a survey. We're working actually on it right now. The survey just closed, and it's looking at the impact of COVID on TB, and it's looking at 5 different stakeholder groups, so specifically at people that are actually suffering from TB, healthcare workers, national TB program managers, healthcare workers, and TB researchers. So we are going to be able to look at all that data and actually also stratify it around Global Fund and eligible countries and Global Fund non-eligible countries to actually see the impact. And we're hoping to have this, we're working closely with Robin in Stop TB Canada as well. So it's going to be, it's a joint effort by many groups from around the world, and we're really excited that it's actually a civil society-led survey, which is quite unique. And there's some active TB survivors involved, so it's going to be really interesting to see the results, and we're hoping to have those available by August, so towards the end of August, and we would be really happy to share and also discuss with how we could potentially use these data for feeding into your processes to the Global Fund, and maybe make some clear advocacy calls and policy statements related to the outcomes. So I'm happy to bring this forward to the group and looking forward to be collaborating. This is my very first time, so I'm not fully, and I came in late too, so I'm not fully plugged in yet, but looking forward collaborating in the future.
Terrific. Well, really nice to meet you, Petra. And yes, absolutely, fully support and look forward to our continued conversations together. That's terrific, and a really amazing initiative and an important input into all of these different processes. Yeah, great. Super. Any other ideas, reflections? All right. Well, we are coming to an end to, oh, Robin, yes.
Well, just before everyone signs off, I just wanted to share, because this is a Canadian group of advocates that are working on TB, HIV, and malaria. So I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with Stop TB Canada, or if you've joined and participated in their calls. Mm-hmm. It's been co-chaired by TB practitioners Elizabeth Ray and Dina for the last number of years. Yeah. And fortunately, Results Canada has given me the permission to spend some time allocating, supporting them essentially with admin and comms. So we're starting to rebuild the network with the long-term goal of making it into something that's sustainable as a model and engaging the community on a regular, consistent basis on both domestic and global TB advocacy asks and issues. So the next step really is about, I think it needs to be forming like an executive team that is engaging on TB both in Canada and abroad. So if anybody's interested in supporting that initiative and effort here in Canada, please reach out to me, because yeah, all the support would be welcome. And check out the new website. We just launched a new website. I'm going to share it with you in the chat function. This was designed with the intention of building, connecting, and engaging the community, and about amplifying everybody else's work. So it's now in the chat box. And we are also now active on Twitter again and want to amplify everybody's work. So check the Twitter account out too. And I'll put the email in as well if anybody wants to reach out. But yeah, next step, I think we need to formulate a team of people committed to trying to make this a sustainable model of engaging TB activists and actors in Canada.
That's terrific. So a quick question about resources. So a lot of this stuff is volunteer driven and happens off the side of our desks. But in order to make something truly sustainable and to really give it some legs, often resources are critical. So what kind of financial resources are there available to help to make this something, you know, long-term?
So right now, my time, I've made an investment case for me to spend half of my time working on building the network in Canada. And Results Canada has committed about $15,000.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of like the first step. Right now, I've just laid the foundation, but the next step is building and bringing on other members, and hopefully, yeah, engaging other stakeholders in Canada. If they can contribute financially, that would be fabulous.
Okay, terrific. Well, thanks very much for that, Robin. And for everybody joining us, I know that we are at time and that our schedules are very, very busy, especially this week. So thank you all for joining, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. And you will hear from us again tomorrow with the recordings and the slides. And a special thanks to all of our presenters. Thanks to Katie, thanks to Wangari, and nice to meet new faces and to see old friends. So we'll keep in touch. Be safe, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.